Today I'm going to be addressing the Apostle Paul's ethos for the first century Christian woman. And the scriptures I'm going to be using are 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 to 37, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15, and 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. And this is the question that I'm going to be answering. When Paul mentioned women should remain in silence according to the law, which law was he referring to? Moses' law, Talmudic law. Now, Paul was a scholar of the Talmud, and I have read the Talmud, and I do refer to the Talmud on regular occasions when I'm studying. And basically, I have found some things that Paul said similar to things in the Talmud, but not a lot, but there are similar things. I'm going to ask, was Paul referring to Roman law? Because they were living under Roman law during that time. Was Paul referring to natural law? Now, I will explain natural law a little later. So, which law was Paul referring to? Before I answer that question, I want to just say this, that when we read Paul's letters in the New Testament, we have to understand that he is addressing very specific people, very complex problems within the Christian community, and he's answering their questions. Now, we don't have access to the other parties' questions or problems. We just have basically Paul's answers. And from those answers, we have to try and make sense of what was actually going on. And we don't always understand the full picture. And for Corinthians, for instance, there is a third letter of Corinthians that's actually missing anyway. So even in those three letters, we actually have one letter that's not quite made it into the Bible. But one thing we do know, and that is that everything the apostles wrote were to bring order and establish a solid foundation for the young Christian church. Now, with that, let's proceed to the various laws. I'm going to rule out Moses' law for the simple reason that Moses' law, or anything in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian Old Testament, says nothing about women being silent. So Paul cannot be referencing something that's in there. I'm not saying it wasn't an implied thing or a traditional thing, but it was certainly not written down. I'm also going to eliminate Talmudic law because while there is another situation where I think Paul is referring to the Talmud, basically I'm going to eliminate Talmudic law because there's categorically nothing in the Talmud which says women should remain silent. Roman law, on the other hand, is a completely different scenario, and the apostles were actually living under Roman law. And you can understand, Paul having this background in Talmudic law and being such a scholar that he was. He wasn't exactly a lawyer, but you know what? He was very, very good with interpreting laws. And I think that Paul, what he did was he really, really studied Roman law, and he brought all the aspects of Roman law to the young Christian church in order to explain it to them, make it easy, layman's terms, and also for them to actually live by them so that they didn't actually draw any unnecessary attention to themselves. So let's deal with some of the aspects of Roman law. Obviously, I can't deal with all of them, but as I said, pretty much everything that Paul said about the ethos for the first century Christian woman can be attributed to Roman law. I'll just give you some examples. A head covering, for instance, if a woman went with a head uncovered in a public place, or she was seen with a head uncovered, it meant that she was caught in adultery and she was being shamed. So on the other side of the coin, a woman of lower status, a lower class person, a humble person, would actually, cover their heads and not draw any unnecessary attention to themselves. Upper class people that had wealth and education and career or whatever might just throw away the veil, and they might just show their beautiful hairdos and flaunt themselves. Submissiveness is also one of those things that is very much part of Roman law, that the wives submit to their husbands. Even if he was unfaithful to her, she still had to submit to him. He could have a lover or whatever, and she still had to be submissive. If she had any questions, she was to ask him at home because he was the educated one. She wasn't. So rather than cause a big problem in a public place and ask questions, you asked your husband at home. Like, would I say to a 21st century woman, go home and ask your husband? Well, look, in some cases, you probably could. You go and ask your husband if he was more knowledgeable than what you were. But it's more likely that you'd say to somebody, well, look, just go and Google it, because you probably find a much better explanation on Wikipedia, I'd say. So, just Google it and get your answers that way. Modest apparel, of course, was something that was also very much part of Roman law for the woman, not to expose her shoulders or, part of upper body or whatever. If a woman had braided hair, she wore a lot of gold, pearls, purple makeup, she had high brows, rosy cheeks or whatever, all the things that women love to do. These were considered, not so favorable under Roman law, because the woman was just bringing unnecessary attention to herself, because her main role in life was to actually be a good wife. So everything was about outward signs, and when you saw a woman, you knew whether she was a virgin, whether she was a wife, or whether she was a lady of the evening. So basically, you just knew straight away. And I think Paul was being very cautious with the Christian women, because they were obviously being influenced by the world, just like, Christian women are today. And he was kind of saying to them, look, don't bring any unnecessary attention to yourself. If a woman possessed a quiet and a gentle spirit, of course, under Roman law, she was considered to be, quite, a favorable person. Now, there was an exception to the rule, and there was the new woman. And the new woman is a very interesting concept. And if you read my article online, follow the link below, I do give a bibliography of where I got the information from the new woman. And the new woman basically couldn't care less about what men thought about her, or what the administration thought about her, or what the authority. She was actually a real threat. She wanted a career. She wanted to be loud and boisterous if she wanted to. She wanted to wear whatever she wanted and basically do whatever she wanted, and she couldn't care less. And if she decided she was going to take a younger lover, she did, as was in the case of Corinth. So you can see Paul's dilemma that he was facing. He was actually bang smack in the middle of this sexual revolution, and he was addressing it in the Corinthian church. I'm now going to go to natural law. Now, natural law is one of those things that really does my head in, because natural law, from what I can gather, is kind of very, very ancient laws that have been passed down through the generations, and you consider it a law because, it was established by observing nature. But, nature doesn't always follow the same laws. So you might say, well, is it natural for this, or is it natural for that? Like Paul asked, is it natural for something? Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, because, for instance, if you take the peacock, for instance, you have him, so proud and beautiful and stunning and just magnificent, and you have the female, which is very drab and very plain. So, I don't think nature always follows the same rules. There's always an exception to the rule. But this natural law was a very intricate part of Roman law. And I'm going to quote Plutarch here. Now, Plutarch says that these ancient practices, ancient laws, ancient things that were forbidden in ancient laws, are also forbidden by our laws. So in other words, he's saying that, we pretty much follow the same, old laws that have been, ancient and established for a long time. He says there is one proviso, and the proviso is, of course, that he has very harsh punishments. And the Romans did. If you ever get a chance to study some of the punishments that the Romans had, were absolutely like cruel, unimaginable things. Like they would take, radishes and shove them up people's anuses until, their bowels burst inside them, and just the most vilest, horrible things. So the apostles would have been quite concerned about keeping the Christians safe, is my point here. So Plutarch also talks about the supervisors of the women. Now, all the women had a supervisor. The supervisor was usually her head. And, if she misbehaved herself or was, had, bad behavior or bad conduct or whatever, her supervisor could get punished or he could get fined or whatever. So the male head was a very important aspect of Roman law. I'm going to now come to Peter, and Peter offers a different take on Paul. Now, Paul uses the word silent, which in a way contradicts his own writings, because, women are allowed to speak in church, they're allowed to sing, they're allowed to prophesy, they're allowed to, bring tongues or whatever. So you can't say you have to be silent, but you can't speak. So it's contradictory. Peter uses the same words that the Romans use, and that is quietness and gentleness. Okay, that's really good qualities of, he says, of a woman, a good woman. Peter takes it back to the holy women of old. Interesting, just like Plutarch. Plutarch says these laws are very ancient. Well, Peter's like, well, okay, there may be Roman law to do all these things, but, the holy women of old, they also lived by these. And he uses Sarah as an example, Sarah, who was Abraham's wife. Now, Peter said Sarah actually called Abraham Lord. I wouldn't go as far as calling any man Lord, but Peter stated that to emphasize the fact that this is how much Sarah, respected and loved her husband. And he used her as an example. But now this actually brings another element to it. And this is where I think the Christian woman should actually sit down and look at this and say, well, okay, fair enough. Even if Paul was only referring to, Roman law and those particular times, what is my responsibility according to Peter, right, in regarding looking as for an example to the holy women of old and how they would have conducted themselves? Interesting. Think about it. So, Paul says silence, Peter says gentleness and quiet spirit. Very different things. Now, gentleness and quietness and things like that are very also in tune with Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 23. And in Galatians, we talk about the fruit of the Spirit. That's not just for women, right? It's not just for Christian women. It's for Christian men and Christian women, anybody that has the Spirit of God. And gentleness and quietness and all those things, and long-suffering and all, they are all part of the fruit of the Spirit. So there you go. I'm going to finish off with this little thing here from Roman Wives and Roman Widows by Bruce C. Winter. Now, what Paul also mentioned this, and that you older women to be examples to younger women, right, in how to conduct themselves. And this was very much also a Roman thing. And we have this letter from Melissa to Clarietti, I think her name is. And, this is an older woman exhorting a younger woman. And she says, and that's found in page 73, by the way, in the book that I just mentioned. She says, for this younger woman to be in quietness, to wear simple, clean, clothing, not costly or elaborate, nothing excessive, no purple and gold, stay away from the purple and gold. You don't want to look like a call girl, she says. So, to attract men. okay? But you want to be pleasing to your husband, okay? So in other words, dress for your husband, dress for yourself, don't dress for the man next door. So she talks about temperance, chastity, self-restraint, and to honor and love your husband. And then she goes on to say also, there's the gold, there's the braided hair, there's the perfume, there's the makeup, there's the red cheeks, the dark eyebrows, the lashes, the dyed hair, and the bathing frequently. Well, that was frowned upon, right? Not too many baths, and obviously because it was a public place that you had to go to have a bath. So obviously if you didn't go there too many times, you were kind of like, I guess, in a way, not exposing yourself that much. So so that's interesting, isn't it? So when you actually look at that, and there's so much more in books about Roman wives and Roman widows. For the full article and my bibliography, please refer to the article on my blog. I've put the link below. And where does this leave us as a 21st century woman? Well, Christian woman. I think that we have to. Look to Peter, really. And I think that we have to look at ourselves, and we look at how we represent ourselves, how we conduct ourselves, and whether or not we are, being a good witness for God at the end of the day. And that's all that matters. So thank you very much for listening. Bye.